When it comes to docking, protecting your top sides is super important, and the easiest way to protect your top sides is to use fenders. So fenders are going to be bumpers between your beautiful paint job and a wooden pier or concrete seawall, nails, all sorts of funky stuff that you're going to be brushing up into if you don't have a fender in place. So when you're setting fenders, when you approach a dock, if it's a floating dock, you can assume that it's going to be pretty low to the water. So you always want to set your fenders just about to touch the water. If it's a fixed pier, who knows? It depends on the tide, it depends on the construction style. It could be anywhere. So in those cases, it's a little more complicated, and you want to be ready to adjust your fenders for whatever the height actually is when you finally get in there. So this brings up a really important point of how do you attach your fenders to your boat. There's two main ways. One is to tie them to your lifelines. They're right here, they're very accessible, and it's a really easy system to do. It's a line that runs perpendicular to your fender whip, by the way. The line that goes to your fender is called a fender whip. And you can tie something as simple as a clove hitch right on here, and it's secure. And if you need to adjust its height, you can real quickly come along and bring them down or bring them up. To tie the clove hitch, you simply bring the fender whip over the lifeline, loop it under it, bring it back over. You're going to pull the whole thing over. Now you're going to cross over to the other side, go under the lifeline, and then you're going to pass the end of it through that little loop, and you'll pull it tight. What you formed is an X, and that is a clove hitch. Now, tying your fenders to the lifelines seems like an okay way to do this. The problem is if the fender takes a lot of load, all that load goes to your lifeline, and when it starts pulling, it's going to really start banging on your lifelines, and that puts a lot of stress and strain on your stanchions, which puts strain on your stanchion bases, which makes leaks in your deck, and the problems just start cascading from there. So if you're going to be tying up in a situation where you know that it's going to be rough, and the fenders are going to pinch against the pier, and then they're going to start yanking and lurching on your lifelines, instead of tying to your lifelines, tie to your tow rail. If you have a perforated aluminum tow rail, you have a ton of places that you can tie it to. Now, there's two ways to tie to your tow rail. One is using a knot that I love called the Magnus hitch. So for the Magnus hitch, the line comes up, and you take the tail, and you run it through. And then you do the same again. And on the same side. So you're making two wraps away from the line. Now you have these two wraps made. Then you're going to cross over, and you're going to come in from the bottom. So the opposite direction you're doing your wraps. Before you're doing the wraps this way, now you're going to do the wrap that way. So you have it through, and before you tighten it, you bring this guy back out. End up with a tongue, two wraps in one direction and then a wrap in the other. Now, after this has been really tightly loaded, it's really easy to untie because all you have to do is loosen the tongue and you can pull this guy right out. Now, the downside of the Magnus hitch over a clove hitch is there's one extra wrap. And people also aren't as familiar with it, so if someone has to go adjust it quickly, they don't know what they're doing with it. So the clove hitch, by comparison, is where you come over and go through and just one time. Now you come to the other side and you go in the exact same direction. So in, and then before the loop closes, you bring it back through. And that is a clove hitch. So that's the difference. This one, every loop goes in the same direction and it's one on one side, one on the other, and you're done. The Magnus hitch is two in one direction on one side, and then the opposite direction on the other side. So you have three loops here instead of just two. Now, if you don't want to tie a Magnus hitch because you want to tie something that's a little more familiar, you can also tie a cleat hitch. For tying a cleat hitch on your tow rail,
you want to imagine that this span here is the body of the cleat, and these are the horns. They just happen to be closed off on both sides. But these are going to be the horns, and this will be the body that you're working with. So, the fender whip comes in, and then you're going to pass it to the other side. So it's making one straight pass, so it comes in and goes straight across. This is going to be the first crossover. It comes back, but now, you know how you normally do the twist and pull? Well, you can't because it's closed off. So all you have to do is go through the hole, and instead of pulling it off tight, you come through the little loop you've made. And there, you have a cleat hitch tied off on your tow rail. Cleat hitches are excellent because even under load, you can still open them up, loosen them, tighten them, whatever you need to do. It's all very accessible and easy to work with. So the cleat hitch is my personal favorite for tying up heavy fenders, especially like these rope fenders that we have here, because they are super heavy and it's hard to get them into position sometimes. And then if you have to adjust them or raise them up and down, having a cleat hitch makes it so much easier to work with. To recap, if it's short term, quick and easy, simple conditions like right now where the water's glassy calm, simply set them just above the water line. So have them go down, they touch, come back up, and then just tie it off with the clove hitch on the lifeline. You can do this also just for docking. You get in, once you're in position and you're not going to be adjusting them a lot, then you can tie them off with a cleat hitch onto the tow rail. If you're going to be tying up to a seawall and you know it's going to be really rough, there's a risk that your inflatable fender can pop. And if it pops, all your protection's gone, and now your top sides are going to be grinding up against the concrete seawall. That is where a rope fender comes into play. They are unpoppable by nature because they are not inflated. They are just a mass of solid rope. In a future video, I will show you guys how to make these. They will chafe your top sides if you just put them right out against your hull. And that kind of defeats the purpose right there. So what you want to do is set an inflatable fender, and you can tie that to the lifelines with a clove hitch. And then you bring your rope fender along. Now you want to have it tied off on one end. That way you don't have to worry about it falling in the water because these guys are heavy. And then you just bring it around. And then you can tie it off with the cleat hitch to your tow rail. And there you have your rope fender deployed with your top sides protected by the inflatable fender. This setup has gotten us through a lot of storms on a lot of nasty walls where everyone else's fenders popped and just ground away their hulls. It was very sad to see. And when we were done, the rope fender was just a little chafed. This setup looks a lot like a fender board. And that's because it is. So a fender board would be, you have a setup like this, you put your fenders down, and then you put a board across. And the board helps protect if you're against pilings and stuff like that because it spreads out the contact patch. Now, the difference between a fender board and this setup is that this setup has cushion in the board. So you get some added push in there, and that can make a huge difference. If you're going to be using it like a fender board where you're up against a piling and it's going to be hitting in like kind of in the middle, you'll want to use two fenders. So naturally you'd want one here and one here. All these setups depend on how many fenders do you carry, how many fenders do you have on hand right now, how many are available, all that kind of stuff. But this general concept will get you through a lot of sticky situations when it comes to docking and tying up the things. And it'll keep your boat safe. Now, for undoing it, it's super easy. You have a cleat hitch for the front of the rope fender. Simply untie it, pull it free, and bring it right back up. And it lays down. And then you can bring up your inflatable one as well. So let me know in the comments down below, how many fenders do you guys use when you're docking, and where's your favorite place to put them? Do you put them right in the midship at the biggest bulge of the hull? Do you put them more towards the aft, the front? Like, where do you put them? Also, do you use vertical fenders or do you set them horizontal? And lastly, do you like the tube kind
or do you like the ball kind? Let me know in the comments.
Thanks for watching this episode of Sailing Wisdom. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next Rigging Doctor episode. And if you're interested in even more Rigging Doctor awesomeness, consider becoming a patron to see all of our extras. Can't wait to see you next time as you join us out here on the high seas.